for a closer look at the U.S. economy, I'm joined now by Diane Lim. She's an economist and author of the blog Economist Mom. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rachelle.
So let's start with your reaction to today's better than expected jobs report for June.
Well, it was really good news. I think a lot of it was expected in terms of the distribution of new jobs added. We had over 40% of the new jobs were added in the leisure hospitality sector, and nearly a quarter of those jobs were within of the more than nearly a quarter of the total jobs added were in just bars and restaurants. So for anyone who's just walking around in the economy right now, I think that's probably not a big surprise that that's where we're seeing the biggest growth in consumer demand and therefore jobs.
So then, with jobs topping expectations but unemployment still ticking up, how would you
Mhm.
describe the overall state of the U.S. labor market?
Well, I think it shows there's still a lot of room for labor supply to increase and labor force participation to increase. It shows that we're not quite back to where we were pre-pandemic. It also emphasizes, it sort of underscores that we've reached a high level of employment and a much lower level of unemployment, and yet it's going to be hard to squeeze that last bit of labor supply out of the economy because a lot of people have pulled out of the labor force or have changed occupations, or even moved geographically out of areas that they used to live and work.
And we did see people trying to adapt. We also saw that women were disproportionately hurt by the pandemic. In the beginning of the year, women seemed to be left out of these jobs gains, but now in June's data, it looks like they've secured nearly half the jobs. What do you attribute that shift to, and what do we know about the quality of those jobs?
Well, if you think about the jobs that went away the most dramatically at the beginning of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, they were exactly the jobs that we're now seeing roaring back. So, what is attributable, what we can attribute this dramatic jobs gain in leisure hospitality to, is the fact that we're coming from such depths of basically the shutdown economy of the pandemic. So, where we're seeing the gains is exactly the mirror image of where we saw the biggest losses last year. Of course, those jobs in leisure hospitality and other human intensive service occupations are jobs that are disproportionately held by women, and also disproportionately held, by the way, by people of color, young people, and immigrant workers. So some of that story of who held those jobs that went away so quickly last year is part of the explanation, explains why jobs are so hard, why it's so hard to bring back those workers now. A lot of women that dropped out not just because their occupation was not in demand, but because they had to care for family members at home with schools closed. A lot of the immigrant workers that used to work leisure hospitality and used to come over maybe just for a summer tourist season are not coming over this year because visas are still suspended with other countries. So we're seeing that the U.S. economy normally relies on a lot of female workers, a lot of immigrant workers, foreign workers who come over here even just temporarily,
Right.
and we just don't have them available right now. So it's going to be hard to get all that demand satisfied.
And you mentioned a lot of different minority groups. We know that black workers were particularly hit hard by the pandemic. Now, some of these are seeing gains in this June report, but we're still seeing these disparities. Why is that, and how can those disparities be lessened?
Well, I do think that a lot of the people of color and women do have more of these burdens for caring for family at home, and did have to juggle a lot of roles during the pandemic. And it's not so easy to come back to the way they used to work. I also think that some people may be able to come back, but are having second thoughts about going back to these mostly part-time hourly wage jobs that don't come with benefits, don't come with paid leave. So I think a lot of people that used to work these in leisure hospitality industries are not so keen, not so excited to come back to work because they've had a lot of time away from those jobs, and they may have either switched jobs or they may just be rethinking what kind of job is worth them, leaving their current situations with their families, and their friends. Like, they may have moved on to a different quality of life, and they may be pickier right now about what it'll take to bring them back into their old jobs.
And obviously, a lot of people's budgets have changed, as you mentioned. But obviously, you have a
Hmm.
holiday weekend now coming up, usually a busy time for consumption. In fact,
Yeah.
AAA expects 48 million people to travel for this 4th of July holiday weekend. The National Retail Federation says, thanks to vaccinations and fewer COVID restrictions, Americans are planning celebrations. How much can we expect them to spend this holiday compared to previous years?
Well, I don't know exactly what the predictions are in terms of dollar amounts that they'll spend, but I definitely agree that we're going to see a lot of people out and about this holiday weekend. You know, I think that the fact that people feel so safe in terms of the effectiveness of the vaccinations is the reason why consumers are so confident right now about the economy. So it's the first time consumer confidence has grown so quickly due to basically a factor that's not that tied to confidence in the economy, but confidence in our control, our nation's control over the pandemic. So I think we're going to see a big surge in demand. I think we're going to see lines at restaurants, you know, waiting lists to get into places. I think that this is the first holiday where things feel pretty back to normal for the US population.
Well, thank you for your insights. Thank you for joining us. Diane Lim there, economist and author of the blog Economist Mum.